Good afternoon. This is Ukraine Media Center, Odessa. This is our second briefing for today, and our second guest for today. This is Oleksandr Samoilenko, the head of the Kherson Regional Council. He is with us online. The first question, Oleksandr, what information do you have now about the occupied part of Kherson and about the part that has been liberated by the armed forces of Ukraine? What information can you share with us? Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Odessa. First of all, I would like to thank Odessa residents for their hospitality to those people who are forced to leave Kherson and Kherson Oblast due to constant shelling by the enemy. As for the situation that we currently have, most of Odessa Oblast is still occupied by Russian forces, but almost the whole territory, which is on the right bank of the Dnipro river of Kherson, has been controlled remotely by the armed forces of Ukraine. And I hope that in the nearest future, this territory will be completely liberated from the occupational power and also from the collaborators. As for the situation on the occupied territories, I think there is plenty of information from the open sources saying that the occupiers have been leaving Kherson and destroying different buildings and objects, including the old one, which are about 200 years old. They have stolen the Suvorov and Ushakov monuments. Today, they have stolen the Potemkin monument as well. And I think that in the upcoming peaceful life, we will find a place for other heroes to build monuments for them. But they leave their wounded, they just bury their soldiers alive on the territory, but still they are more preoccupied with the monuments. They evacuate the monuments and some different type of equipment from different enterprises. Even from the oncology hospital, they have been stealing the radiological equipment. This is briefly about the territory which is still occupied by Russians. We have been observing humanitarian crisis there because the products that were transported from the temporarily occupied Crimea are over, so there are still some local products that have been produced in Kherson Oblast, and the situation reminds the situations that we had during the first day of the occupation, before there was supply established from the Crimean territory. As for the liberated territories, I can say that the Ukrainian power has been re-established there, including the pension system. So those people who were on the occupied territories and could not receive their pensions for the period of time of the occupation have received all the funds, all the compensations. So, yeah. Especially, we can say this about people who used to get their pensions through Ukrposhta. So there is no debt now. Ukrposhta is back on the liberated territories, as well as the banking system that works on the territory. And now we can say that almost all over the occupied territories, the mobile connection has been reestablished. And the Internet networks have been restored, the ones that were destroyed by Russians. And I would like just to remind what has been mentioned by Irina Vereshchuk, our minister on the occupied territories, who asks the people on the temporarily occupied territories and on the liberated territories to leave for the period of winter. And when it comes to Vysokopilya, the occupied territories, the infrastructure has been destroyed. Almost 90% of the infrastructure has been destroyed. The same is for Oleksandrovka. The scale of destruction is also very significant, and unfortunately we don't have time to restore the whole infrastructure. That's why we ask people to leave the occupied territories for us to be able to work there more efficiently. The government has been providing funds to restore these territories in the nearest future, at least to bring these territories to the conditions which are suitable for living. But again, I would like to emphasize that these territories are still under constant shelling. And even if there is no shelling, the level of destruction is still very high. As far as I know, the evacuation from the occupied territories to Ukrainian territory is not possible. Do you have the information how people are still there in Kherson and are these people deported by Russians to the territory of Russia and to Crimea? How many people have left? You see that there were several channels for Kherson residents to leave the occupied territory to the territory of Mykolaiv Oblast, but then the routes were changed and they could leave still the occupied territories through Zaporizhia. Before the so-called referendum that was announced by the occupiers, they had prohibited the men and now the whole population to leave from there. So now it is called a controlled leave. So people have to get permission to get to the territory of the Russian Federation. The permissions are issued quite slowly, and sometimes we have days when around 10 to 30 people can leave. And now I'm talking about the settlement of Vasilivka in Zaporizhia. That's why when it comes to displacement of our citizens, they can leave the occupied territories from the temporarily occupied Crimea or to the Russian Federation. There was some kind of scam, so to say, that they tried to do. So they announced holidays at schools, offering children a so-called trip to the temporarily occupied territories of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea or Rostov Oblast or Krasnodar region for the children to go there. And so for 2-3 weeks they were able to provide more or less decent conditions for the children in the different pioneer camps. But after that, we have been observing deportation because Russian authorities refused to bring back children to their homes. And now they say that only parents can get those children from these camps. And they also require for both parents to be present to get their children. But we should remember that it is almost impossible to come back to Kherson Oblast after leaving these territories. Because for 90% people are sure that they won't be able to get back. So this is kind of a clandestine deportation. And we keep saying that people should not consent with the proposals of the occupiers. But sometimes they're too gullible, and sometimes they were tempted by the possibility to have free rest in those camps. But we still should remember that our enemies, occupiers, have the main task is to destroy Ukrainian nation. Thank you. Are there any questions from our audience? So there is a question from the audience. It's better Russian or Ukrainian because Oleksandr can hear only what's happening in the audience. Can you hear me? Oleksandr, can you hear the question? Sorry for speaking Russian. Michael Vasuri from the Newsweek. The question is about the situation in Kherson. There were a lot of reports in the Western media that Russia and Russian forces are going to withdraw from Kherson. There was another report saying that they have been mobilizing their forces in the city itself, and they are not going to withdraw from there. So what can you see in terms of the situation of Kherson? What are the plans of the Russian forces? Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. If you allow, I will answer in Ukrainian. And there are quite interesting collapses in this city. The professional army representing Russian guards, the Russian Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation. So those military who, at least in their appearance, looked like military, have been quite actively leaving the territory, and now they bring there the people who have been recently mobilized in the Russian Federation. And the people who are brought now there do not understand what's happening now there. They're not motivated at all, and they just start looting. So there are two ways to take Ukrainian items from the Ukrainian museums or equipment from different hospitals. So to say official, in quotation marks, but now we have different types of looting. Those people who come from the poor regions of the Russian Federation just rob everything they can. We have partisans staying on the territory who provide information about the activities of the occupiers to us. And those people just tried to get to the left bank on the river. And actually all the bridges, all the crossings have been destroyed, including the Antonivsky Bridge. So just you can just cross it, to try cross it by foot, but the crossing of vehicles is impossible there. Those pontoon crossings, temporary pontoon crossings, have been successfully destroyed by the Ukrainian armed forces. So perhaps they want to stay in Kherson, trying to keep it to themselves, but they have a military equipment on the right bank, and they can't get it there. The soldiers are not motivated at all, and there are no professional military that can organize the protection activities to hold the city. And now Putin is trying to create the image demonstrating that they are trying to hold the city. But you know that Putin says that he now fights the whole world, the NATO forces, and perhaps they want to show those mobilized people staying in Kherson as martyrs who died protecting the Russian Federation. And I have one more question. After the occupation of the part of Kharkiv's oblast, the police officers, soldiers, and journalists found a lot of signs proving the military crimes by Russian forces. These are kidnapping, tortures, etc. And now we can see that partially different towns in Kherson Oblast are being liberated. Do you have the proofs of similar crimes on the liberated territories or near? To be honest, we have such cases as well, and unfortunately we will have more information about such cases because the occupiers staying in Kiev Oblast and in Kharkiv Oblast or in Kherson Oblast are the same. And Kherson Oblast has been under occupation even longer than Kiev and Kharkiv Oblasts. And of course, they have more time to commit such crimes. But I want to say that now we have the frontline territories, and unfortunately, the armed forces of Ukraine are not that quick for us to say that we have liberated enough territories to work to the full extent. But as for the evidence against humanity, against local populations, is quite substantive. And the Kherson prosecutor's office and investigative parties will be able to provide this information later. And unfortunately, we have already recorded such cases. And there is quite a number of such cases, but I can't provide the information before this is allowed by the competent authorities and law enforcement bodies. Oleksandr, as far as I remember, there have been quite a long discussion in terms of the liability of those citizens of Ukraine who were forced or voluntarily receive Russian passports and had some positions under the occupation. Can you tell us, please, what should such people expect, those people who were forced or voluntarily received Russian passports or cooperated or forced to cooperate with the occupation authorities? I know that people who are still on the occupied territories are worried about this. If we analyze the referendum results, even that their election commission showed, according to my calculations and the calculations of my colleagues, in general, in this so-called referendum, 5,000 people participated. Partially, those were residents of Kherson Oblast and others who participate in the so-called voting carousel. So these were people who were brought from the territory of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea or from other territories occupied by the Russian Federation. Whatever people see now, no one. Can you repeat, please? Can you repeat, please, starting from the words "the passport of the Russian Federation"? We had some connection problems because this is important. I want to say that no one forcibly received passports of the Russian Federation. That was on a voluntary basis. Perhaps they wanted to get some benefits, but this is my personal opinion, basing on the information I get from Kherson Oblast, from locals. As for cooperation, cooperation can be different. If someone bakes bread just to provide food to their fellow residents. No one will consider that this is an example of collaboration, that this is a crime against the state of Ukraine or the crime against the Ukrainian people. But if that person was one of the first to register his or her companies, if that person started cooperating with the enemy, providing equipment and some other items to the enemy, this is quite a different case. No person cooperating with the enemy to preserve their lives or lives of their loved ones will be punished for this. But no collaborator who wanted to cooperate with the enemy otherwise should be prosecuted. This is my personal opinion, the opinion of the Ukrainian government, of the Ukrainian state, and of the Ukrainian people in general. Because if the person became a traitor once, it is impossible to coexist with these people, and we can't leave such Ukraine for our children with the collaborators unpunished living on its territory. We have one more question from our audience. The mic, please. The interpreter won't be able to hear you. Please turn on the mic. Thank you. As for cooperation with the occupiers, just a month ago, Ms. Vereshchuk, the Vice Prime Minister, said that every person cooperating with the occupiers should be considered as a collaborator. And the same goes for those who voted during the referendum. But quite recently, the head of Donetsk Oblast, Mr. Haidai, said that a lot of people were forced to participate in the voting because they were threatened with rifles. And what can we do with such people who were first to vote? Will they be brought to some liability? Thank you. Haidai represents Luhansk Oblast. And I can speak about Kherson Oblast. Around 60% of the population of Kherson Oblast left the occupied territory. Those 40% who are still there now, and those who are staying in Kherson and in some big cities and towns, are well known. And just believe me, there are no people among them who actively cooperate without being noticed. For those people who participated in the referendum, of course, armed people, people with machine guns, just forced people to participate in the voting. And but we, as for the bringing to criminal liability of a person only for participating in the referendum, are non-existent. Even taking in consideration that that was a secret voting, so we can never establish if that person voted for or against becoming the part of the Russian Federation. That's why we can't say that every person participating in the voting should be brought to liability, because this is wrong even from the legal point of view. But if this person during the whole period of the occupation was in constant contact with the occupiers, providing some services, providing accommodation, and we can speak about other different examples that can speak about the necessity of bringing this person to liability, as well as the person who was involved in organizing the referendum. And we understand that these people knew perfectly well what were they doing, understanding that they could be brought to the criminal liability. And these people were not forced by machine guns. and they knew what they did, and they got money for this. And of course, I 100% sure that no person participating in the referendum would be punished or brought to the criminal liability. But those who organized the voting, those who counted the votes, those who announced false results of the referendum should be brought to the criminal liability. They should be punished because there is no place for collaborators in our society because they are traitors. Thank you for your time, Oleksandr. We will now finalize. We will now stop here. And I think that you're always welcome to come to us whenever you're in Odessa, and we will keep inviting journalists and you to get the information from you to know what's happening on the occupied territories of Kherson Oblast. And I would like to thank you and to thank all our viewers. And tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, we will be having new briefings. So please follow our announcements on the official channel and on the website. See you.